All eyes for the Orlando Magic are obviously on their two top players. So why does it feel like their preseasons are so different? Plus, how the Magic are building leadership in training camp today on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is October 14th. It will be October 15th, probably by the time I upload this, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, both Paolo, Banchero, and Franz Wagner are kind of doing their own thing to get ready, how their paths have differed in the preseason, and why ultimately they will come together as one. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's great Locked On podcasts covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for. The Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Preseason stats are pretty relevant. I want to just make that abundantly clear. You could look at the numbers, you could look at the stat boards or anything else. We're not going to learn a lot. We're not going to see a lot. And I know I've made this point throughout the course of the last week. The Magic do seem like they know that there's a switch they can turn, and they're choosing to turn it on in practice, it feels like, and not so much in the games. If you're judging this team based solely off of the preseason, off of the two preseason games we've had so far, you're probably coming away thinking to yourself, oh, Paolo looks like he's made another step. He looks like he's kind of cool, calm, and just kind of doing whatever he wants to do. And Paolo probably agrees with you on that. The way he broke down on Saturday his game or what he's seeing on the floor, he said, I just do whatever the game calls for from me. I'm just going to do whatever the game calls for. On Monday against New Orleans, it asked me to attack and be aggressive and get my points, and that's why he had 15 points in, 20 minutes? And then on Wednesday, he said, well, Wednesday's game felt like, with Victor Wembanyama in the paint, with Jeff Howard in the lineup, it called for me to be a passer and distributor, to take and soak up attention and make it work for others. The fact that there was that kind of duality, the fact that the Magic could get both of those games out of Paolo Banchero was really encouraging. And I do think that is ultimately a good thing for the Magic, that they're seeing this. And look, I'm going to hype Paolo up. I think if preseason means anything, it's going to be really good. Franz Wagner, on the other hand, has had a very different preseason experience. Franz Wagner, on the other hand, has scored 8 points in both preseason games, but has struggled to shoot. Notably, 0 for 4 total from 3, but shooting like 3 for 8 in Wednesday's game. Not the efficient, not the dynamic player that we expect. Having said that, if you're just looking at the box score, you might come away disappointed. But if you watch the games, you saw Franz get to his shots and just maybe miss a floater or two, or try a jumper, or try a different type of shot. To say the least, I'm not worried about Franz Wagner. Franz Wagner doesn't seem worried about Franz Wagner. The entire Magic team doesn't seem worried about Franz Wagner. It certainly feels like the preseason games, the two that the Magic have played so far at least, are not the team's chief concern. They're not looking at those two preseason games and saying that's the entirety of what we're going to be this season. Because the Magic have practices. And those practices sound a lot more intense and a lot more intentional than the preseason games. Again, the preseason is what we get to see as the public, so I get trying to judge them. But there's a lot of work going on elsewhere. And Monday when practice was kind of a reset day. They went over the tape from their scrimmaging on Saturday. They started correcting some mistakes, getting back to work. Franz Wagner even said that he feels like the offense is ahead of where it was last year, which could be good, could be bad. We'll find out in a week. To put it this way, then, how the Magic get ready for the regular season, how the Magic get ready for how each individual player gets themselves kind of geared up to what they need to do is different. Paolo has the ball in his hands a lot. He's seeing all these double and triple teams and crazy things. And obviously he knows he doesn't need to score 50 points or anything in a preseason game. If the defense wants to take his scoring away, he'll just work on his passing that day. And he described it as each game is a quiz, and maybe he won't pass the quiz every week, but every game. But so far, he's passed every quiz in the preseason. I think we're all very, very happy with him. Franz is also kind of feeling his way out through these things. And very much so, it doesn't feel like either player's turned their intensity up to 10, at least in the preseason games. Again, practice is probably a different story, but for now, it doesn't feel like the Magic are quite clicking on all cylinders in their 2 preseason games. And certainly doesn't feel like their 2 stars are operating on the same level. But it's also very possible the Magic are exactly where they want to be. That those 2 players know exactly what they need to do to be ready for next Wednesday in Miami. That what we're seeing publicly is only a fraction of what they're going to do and what they're going to be when the season starts. I say this about Summer League all the time, and I think we could say this about preseason to some extent too. Preseason is not about telling you who's going to do what in the regular season. It's about who's not going to do what. But even then, Franz is getting good 3-point looks. They're just not falling. He's getting to his spots. They're just not falling. And while that's frustrating, you can live with it because you know he's going to get better, and you know the Magic are probably working on something else. Whatever the Magic are working on in these games, both Paolo and Franz know how to get themselves ready. They know the ball is going to be in their hands a lot. They know they're going to get their shots. And so they know that they just got to do what they got to do to be ready and focused and locked in when the minutes increase, when the shots increase, to get themselves in game shape. And that's, again, why the practices are probably more important than the preseason games, because preseason games, they know they're only going to play 20 minutes or so. They're not going to play a ton. In practice, they're in all the time. And again, that's why I stressed everyone that the preseason games aren't the gospel. Either way, I think the Magic know their 2 best players are going to be prepared. And that's why a lot of these preseason games are really about how they help the other players get prepared. How they help Jet Howard integrate into the starting lineup when he has to play with them. How they help Jalen Suggs get comfortable playing point guard. And whatever that role is going to be. It's how they how they build trust and test out whether they can look to the corner for Jet Howard or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Gary Harris or whoever it is to be that outlet, to make those decisions when they pass out. Because when we get to next Wednesday, Paolo and Franz will be aggressive again. Always aggressive. Looking to make the right play, but always aggressive. And this comes to the bigger point and the bigger thing that Paolo and Franz have had to learn and had to show during the preseason, during this time, during training camp. For a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old, or 23-year-old, I think Franz is 23, for 2 players who are exceptionally young, they are having to step into clear leadership roles. And how they embrace that role could be one of the biggest stories for the Magic this year. We'll talk a little bit about what they both had to say about being leaders on this team coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. It is a busy time here in Central Florida. UCF football season's in progress. Florida State in progress as well. We got the Magic getting ready to start. Orlando City has their final home game this Saturday against Atlanta United before they begin the playoffs. The Orlando Pride are playing their final home game here very soon before they begin the playoffs. This is the best time in the sports calendar generally, but it's a great time here in Orlando. And if you want tickets to these events or any event in Central Florida, Gametime is the place for you. Gametime even has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite teams play even easier. Just Gametime Picks will filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Navigating through Gametime is so easy. You literally just pick the event. They have a map of the arena. They show you all the game prices. They'll show you which tickets are the cheapest, which tickets are cheaper than normal, and then you can click through and find your seat. They also give you this great digital panoramic view from your seat so you know exactly what the court, stage, field, whatever is going to look like before you buy your tickets. And with their lowest price guarantee, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a lower price for that same seat somewhere else. Or general area, I think. Gametime's ticket coverage means your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And honestly, their customer service is great. I had a problem with one of my tickets one time when I bought a ticket off Gametime. It was really a problem with the MLB app. It wasn't with Gametime. Gametime emailed me the tickets. They texted me the tickets, actually. So I had them on my phone. It was no big deal. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So I want to make this part really clear. On this Orlando Magic team, leadership is a team effort. Everybody is going to have a part to play in making sure this and in holding this team accountable. Someone's got to hold Paolo accountable. Someone's got to hold Franz accountable. You know, everybody is going to work together to achieve this team goal. And that's an important thing to remember. I actually think that's a really important thing to remember because the Magic are such a young team. You know, they're going to lean on Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and he's someone who's taking guys off to the side. You know, we saw the clip from the Magic All Access that NBA.com put out where he's talking with Paolo and explaining where he's going to be. Everybody has a part to play. But Paolo, Banchero, and Franz Wagner know that they set the tone for the team. We could talk about all these little things and everything that we want to, but the reason why we're focused on how Paolo and Franz are getting ready for the season is because you take your cues from your best players. You could be 21 years old, you could be 23 years old, but if you're the one with the ball in your hands a lot, if you're the one with the game online, if you're the one making the majority of decisions that determine whether your team is successful or not, you are naturally a leader. The team will follow your cues. They will follow your body language. They will follow you because you're the one carrying them. And this is a big ask. It is. Honestly, like, this is one of the questions we should have about this team. It's not a bad thing to ask. It's not like, oh, they can't succeed because Paolo is 21 and is their leading scorer or 22 or whatever he is, or Franz is 23 and the leading scorer. It's not a bad thing to ask this question, but it is very rare for a team this young to be this successful and to be successful in the way the Magic envision themselves being successful. It is not usual to do what the Magic are going to be trying to do this year. Plain and simple. Hands down, foot down. What the Magic are trying to do is not easy. And so, in order to accomplish this, they are relying on two players who have not been leaders or leaders of men, but are being thrust into this role because of who they are. Now, again, they're going to have help. It's not just on them. They're going to be learning too. But both Paolo and Franz have both noted that they are cognizant of this responsibility, that they have to set a tone for the rest of the team, that everybody, whether they want them to or not, is going to follow their lead. Paolo has talked a lot during this training camp about being more vocal, about making sure that his voice is heard. He is a quiet guy. You can tell by his vibes, he's a very chill dude. He is not going to rah-rah guys. He's not going to do any of that stuff. He is competitive as all out. But he's not fiery in that he's going to just talk people up. But he knows he has to be one of the louder voices. He knows he has to have a voice in the room, that he can't just be quiet. And that's a big thing for him to realize and understand. And it's going to be a thing that he's working on all year. Franz Wagner, for his part, he understands what his leadership style is. He is a quiet, analytical guy. He said he he knows that he will have to have his voice heard at some point, but he doesn't want to be the loudest guy in the room. His preferred leadership style is to take someone off to the side, talk to them one-on-one, to see what they're hearing, for him to give his input, to make it more of a dialogue. But again, that's not something he would have done last year. In fact, Franz said he was probably thrown into the deep end of leadership last year, that he and Paolo probably have been asked to do a lot more than they are capable or ready to do. But that's part of the game. That's part of being potential all-stars, of being franchise players, of being a max player. You have that responsibility heaped on you, whether you want it or not. You have that pressure put on you, whether you want it or not. And so Franz is understanding now, maybe in a way that he didn't last year, but certainly does now, that more is going to be asked of him beyond his basketball skills. And because these two players have the ball in their hands a lot and are part of the point guard triumvirate, they have to understand when it's their turn and when it's others' turns. They have to understand how to make everyone else involved. Paolo had a great line about this. Paolo said about Wednesday's game against San Antonio, with Jet Howard in the lineup, he wanted to put it on himself to make sure Jet felt comfortable. And that meant getting him some shots early. It's no coincidence that of the 7 assists that Paolo Banchero had, I believe it was 3 or 4 of them went to Jet Howard. There was definitely an intention to get Jet going, to make him feel welcome, to make him feel comfortable in that starting group. Now, maybe that's an attitude you can get away with in the preseason. And the regular season, maybe that wouldn't work as well as it did. But that's a point guard thinking. That's playmaker thinking. That's leadership thinking. To make sure that everybody is coming up with you. Both Paolo and Franz are going to be working on this throughout the course of the whole season. Like it's not something that's going to stop just because preseason has started. There's going to be moments where we'll want Paolo and Franz to do more or find that better balance. I talk a lot about that balance with Paolo specifically, where there's a balance of being a star, of knowing when it's your turn, when you have to take over, and when you got to make sure everyone else is involved. It is not an exact science. I can't put stats or numbers on it. And when you do it right, you know you've done it right. And Paolo's a lot further along on that process than I think a lot of people give credit for, mainly because his efficiency stats aren't great yet. Everybody has that role to play. And obviously, Paolo and Franz have a bigger role. But this has been one of the big messages throughout the course of training camp. It's not just about Paolo and Franz being the leaders. It's everybody doing their part to let everyone know where they are. It's been a constant refrain throughout the course of training camp. Communication might be the key to the Magic's success. We'll talk about that coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, we're almost halfway through the season. What are we? 1-5. The Jaguars are 1-5, so 6 games through the season. You can continue to start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. With FanDuel, you have so many great offers. It's not just about football. You can get basketball odds too, including the Orlando Magic to win the Southeast Division at -140, the Magic to win the Eastern Conference. I believe they're plus 5,000 on that. Or get a head start on opening night 1 week from Wednesday. The Magic are 1-point underdogs at Miami against the Miami Heat. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's available at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. There's been, again, I like to use coachisms. I like to hear what the coach says and use that as the standard to really judge and figure this team out. And there's been one consistent message from Jamahl Mosley throughout the course of training camp. One thing that he wants to make sure that this team is harping on. Because this team, this project, has really been player-driven. We can talk about all the other stuff all we want. But this is a player-driven project. This is an offense that is free-flowing with a little bit of structure. It's dependent on the players making good decisions. And whether you agree with that strategy or not, or think that's holding them back or not, the Magic, I think, understand this is what's going to help them win at higher levels, even if they're not quite ready for it. But to get there is going to take something different. If this is a partnership with the coaching staff, if this is really player-led, player-driven, then everything has to start with getting on the same page, with being on the same page. And so the constant message throughout the course of training camp has been communication. Talk to your teammates. Pull them aside. Figure out what you're trying to do there, what you're seeing there. Talk to each other on defense. Be in the right spots. Tell your teammates where you are. The key to everything is this communication. Now, look, we talked about it in a little more granular detail with Paolo and Franz, them being leaders. But really, what the Magic are hoping to see from Paolo and Franz is their willingness to talk to their teammates, their willingness to figure out where their teammates are and tell their teammates where they need them to be to make that conversation. This is the key to what the Magic are doing. This is the key to their growth. Yes, their ability to execute is important. And, the Magic probably do believe they have an offensive strategy, and certainly they know they have a defensive strategy that will make them successful, but none of it matters if they don't talk their way through it. If there's a hiccup, they let that slide or they don't get on the same page about it. This training camp is all about that. With new players, with old players, with everybody, it's all about increasing that level of communication and seeing and understanding what each other feels. It could be Corey Joseph bouncing around between players and talking with them and giving him his experience. It could be Jamahl Mosley talking with Jalen Suggs about what he saw in that turnover and how he can get better, or taking that extra film to figure out a way to get better. It could be the Paolo and Franz taking more leadership. It could be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope pulling a player aside and saying, hey, you got to fill the corner, or you got to float to this area, or hey, when he does this, you do that. Using that experience that he has. It could be all these things. It could be simple as guys telling each other where they're at on defense. It's simple. It's something that you can't replicate in like a video game. It's something we don't think about as non-basketball players. But the Magic's ability to communicate, talk, stay on the same page, figure stuff out on their own by talking, not even getting the coaches involved. This is the essential project for the Magic. This is the essential thing the Magic are trying to accomplish. And what's going to take them to the next level. That's what's going to help them be the best version of themselves. And that's why it's been such a buzzword and such a key focus for the team in training camp so far. Because the Magic know to get to that next level, to be the team they know they can be, they've got to talk about it. They've got to find themselves on the same page. They got to find themselves, fixing issues on their own without the coaches having to stop everything, whether it's in practice or a game. And frankly, this is, I think, a thing that the Magic have been very strong at in the preseason. We may not be seeing the results quite yet, but watch the defense. Watch how they swarm and work together. Watch what happens when a mistake is made and how quickly the Magic talk about it. Watch how the bench talks about it. Watch how the bench gets into games and makes that a huge, huge thing for them. It's all part of the same puzzle. This leadership part, this preparation part, it's all part of the same puzzle. That's going to help the Magic get ultimately where they want to go. Whether that's being a home court advantage, whether that's winning a playoff series, whether it's just making the playoffs again and copying their success from last year. The Magic are trying to do all these things. And now, a week before the regular season, now it's about putting them all together. Now it's about taking all these disparate strings that the Magic are working on both individually and as a team and tying them all together into a routine, into a way, into a process that gets you wins night in and night out. That's what the Magic are working toward. That is what the Magic are getting themselves ready for. And obviously they have a week left. They're working really hard in practice. You can feel the intensity in practice and how energized the team is by what they're doing in practice. Honestly, I know I said this, and I hope I'm right about this because I think that would be really good if I'm right about this. I think the Magic are getting far more out of their practices than they are out of the preseason games. I don't think they're showing us publicly the gains that they've made. I have not watched any bit of practice. They don't show us any bit of practice. I've not watched any scrimmage. The only thing I've watched are the preseason games. The vibe I get from being in that building for the practices, after practice, and watching the preseason games are they're holding something back on us. And maybe they unleash some of it Friday against Philadelphia. Maybe they don't. But I do think all these strings are starting to come together. And it's going to be exciting when it does piece together. And when we do get to see this thing in a week. Because the Magic have done all these steps. They have taken all these steps. They have put themselves in a position to be ready. And I think all of us are just, like Mo Wagner said, I think a lot of us are just eager to see the real thing start. Because there's a lot of reason to be excited about this team and what they're building. And we can see those hints. The Magic have told us, like, you can see the hints in the preseason games of what we can be. We know it's all coming together. They just got to keep talking their way through it and they'll get there. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all of my stuff podcasts to your podcast enablers. And you can even check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/@LockedOnMagic. Don't forget, tomorrow night is the Locked On NBA preview roundtables. Our episode goes live on Tuesday night. So definitely subscribe so you know exactly when that premieres, exactly when that debuts. You can check out the latest on the Orlando Magic on OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Follow us on Twitter at OMagicDaily. And for even more Orlando Magic content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. As always, thank you for your support. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic your first listen today. For your next listen, find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Become a fantasy basketball expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Josh Lloyd. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We talked a lot about leadership today. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic, we'll talk a little bit more about the impact Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has had on the team. We'll do that and a whole lot more on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.